Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to MetrObelisk Radio. Today we are looking at the fourth Mad Max movie, Mad Max Fury Road. Now this movie for a long time was known for being an absolute production hell. It's also the first Mad Max movie to not have Mel Gibson as the titular character. So the question on the table is, how does this movie compare to the first three? Would it have been better to bring back Mel Gibson instead of recasting the role with Tom Hardy? Or was this movie going to be bad irregardless of casting decisions? Now, before we get started, make sure to follow the blog, MetrObeliskradio.blogspot.com, where you can stay up to date on all MetrObelisk Radio uploads, no matter if they're exclusive to YouTube, BitChute, LBRY, wherever you're currently watching this on. So with that out of the way, let's get right into Mad Max Fury Road. Now, as always, we always start off with the creative team, and this movie was directed by the one and only George Miller. His other directing credits include the segment Nightmare at 20,000 Feet from the Twilight Zone movie that was released in the mid-80s, the segment obviously being a remake of the classic episode of the original television series that starred William Shatner. He also did movies such as Lorenzo's Oil, The Witches of Eastwick, Babe, Pig in the City, Happy Feet, and Happy Feet 2. Now let's get on to the writers, and we'll start with George Miller himself once again. Now his writing credits include all of the Mad Max movies and all other movies I listed under his directing credits, with the exception of the Twilight Zone movie. He also wrote a TV miniseries called Bodyline, and he also wrote the first Babe movie. Then we get to Brendan McCarthy. Now his writing credits include only one TV show from the mid-90s called Reboot. He wrote the story for just 2 episodes. Otherwise, the bulk of his credits are in the art department, and more specifically as a storyboard artist. And finally, we get to Nick Lathoris. Now this movie is his only writing credit. However, he does have a history with Mad Max. He played one of the street gangsters in the first movie, and that was also one of his first acting jobs. Now, we can't talk Fury Road without talking about its production history, because this is a story in and of itself. And if we want to understand the production history of this movie, we first have to travel back to 1995. That was 20 years prior to the release of the movie. In 1995, George Miller reacquired the rights to Mad Max back from Warner Brothers, and after this, he could take Mad Max 4 to any studio that he wished. Now, the earliest idea for Mad Max 4 came in 1998, and about a year after that, Miller conceived a story where violent marauders were fighting not for oil or material goods, but for human beings. Now, Mad Max 4 was originally going to start shooting in 2001 through 20th Century Fox instead of Warner. Now, that got delayed because of 9/11. Also, at that same time, the US dollar had collapsed against the Australian dollar, so George Miller later stated that he had no choice but to move on to his next project at that time, and that was Happy Feet. Now, in 2003, production was supposed to pick back up in the Australian desert, but the production had to get delayed again because the location was ruined by rainfall. Production had to move all the way over to Namibia. Now, for those that don't know where Namibia is, it's above South Africa, and it borders the western portion of Botswana. If you're watching this on YouTube, LBRY, BitChute, wherever, I will put up a picture of where Namibia is right now. If you're just listening to this, however, I hope that my description was good. I hope that you know your world map. But to get back to the production history, production had to be put on hiatus because of the travel and shipping restrictions that were put in place at the time of the Iraq War. Now, from what I'm reading, Mel Gibson was supposed to return to the role, but George Miller sided with the Hollywood establishment to not cast him as the titular character because of his drunken tirade. He may have been high, or hell, maybe he was high and drunk at the time. You don't know with these Hollywood types. Now, George Miller also tried to defend this decision by saying that he wanted Max to remain younger, blah, 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 blah. In my opinion, this movie was going to be dead in the water without the involvement of Mel Gibson, because now fans were going to go, quote-unquote, not my Mad Max. And in October of 2009, George Miller announced that principal photography would begin in Broken Hill, New South Wales, Australia in 2011. And for those of you that don't know, that's where The Road Warrior was filmed. Now, the movie had moved from 20th Century Fox back to Warner Brothers at this time as well, but production had to be delayed yet again because of another heavy rainfall. Basically turned what was a desert into a nice, beautiful, flowery meadow. Now, so production had to move back to Namibia, and principal photography began in 2012. Obviously, the movie released in summer of 2015. So to cap off this entire segment, Mad Max 4 basically went through absolute development hell, primarily because of bad timing. Yes, I would say that it is a miracle that this movie even got made at all, with all of the delays going back, almost 20 years before the movie even released. Now let's move on to the character analysis portion of our retrospective, and we'll start off with the main character himself, Tom Hardy as Max. And my biggest issue with him is he's basically a background character in his own movie. You could write him out of this movie and effectively nothing would change in the plot. Then we get to Charlize Theron as Furiosa. Now, this is the character that the movie really revolves around. She basically kidnaps the wives of Immortan Joe, and I'll dive deeper into that in just a minute because that actually ties into the plot. But other than her leading the charge, there's really nothing else to this character. And then we get to Hugh Keys-Byrne as Immortan Joe. Now, he's the villain for the movie. Basically, his brides get stolen and he wants them back. Again, I'll dive deeper into that in the narrative portion in just a minute. But Mad Max fans should recognize this name of Hugh Keys-Byrne. Now, can you guess what prior Mad Max he was in? I'll give you some time. Doop doo 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 doo. Okay, I'm fucking bored. I'm gonna stop doing that. He was Toe Cutter in the original movie. He played the villain in the first movie, and now he's back to playing a villain in the latest installment. So we got the original Mad Max villain, which begs the question, why couldn't we get the original Mad Max? And finally, you have a war boy, and I don't remember his name. That's one of Immortan Joe's men. Basically, he goes from being a devout follower of Immortan Joe to falling in love with one of the brides to the point that he sacrifices himself at the end so that she can live. He's a side character, but he's the only character that has really any sort of arc in this movie. Now let's move on to the narrative analysis portion of this episode. And this movie basically opens with Max getting captured and dragged back to what is known as the Citadel. Now, the Citadel isn't the same as Bartertown in the sense of having a town with a functioning economy surrounding trade. The Citadel doesn't even come close to the settlement that was even in the Road Warrior, where they were pumping the oil from the ground. The Citadel is just where a bunch of people live that pumps out water, which water is a precious resource, especially in a desert in the post-apocalypse. I'm not denying that. But this highlights a big problem. Mad Max came out in 1979, so let's assume that the wasteland has been a thing for the past 30 to 35 years by the time of this movie. Why is it that we've only seen one functional town that has a working economy? Why wouldn't there be more by this point in the timeline of Mad Max? We're supposed to believe that after 30 to 35 years, no one can figure out how to build a town with a working economy? I know that most people are going to find this point trivial, but I personally don't, because we've already seen something like this in Beyond Thunderdome. I have no choice but to basically call it a regression instead of progression, which is what a sequel should always strive for. Progress, don't regress. Getting back to it. Now, how the movie plays out is Furiosa is carrying out a mission on a war rig. She's traveling to Gastown to bring back the gas for the Citadel. She changes course, and that's when we learn that Immortan Joe's brides have all escaped with her. The brides left a message and talk that read, "Our babies will not become warlords." And that leads to Immortan Joe hunting down Furiosa and the brides to essentially get back, quote-unquote, what's his. Now, if you're listening to this, then I assume you're smart enough to know exactly where this is going. Furiosa is going to some green place where it's a tribe full of women, but after the journey to get there, she learns that the green place basically no longer exists due to the soil basically becoming foul and basically killed a bunch of people off. Now, I just talked about the first 60 to 90 minutes of the movie, and notice how I have yet to bring up Max. Max is a background character in this movie, and I brought this up in the character analysis portion. Max was always a character that reacted to the plot, except in Beyond Thunderdome, where he was already an established character. He's not even servicing the plot to this movie, so I have no choice but to basically call it this way. He's really inconsequential to the plot. Now, Max at the very end suggests to go back to the Citadel to just take it over. Now, here's where the plot gets weaker. They go back the exact same way that they came. It was a long night's journey supposedly to get to where they are, but they get back to the canyon in almost no time at all, and it seems like all that mud that they got stuck in earlier in the movie just vanished. Poof! Disappeared. Now, this leads to a conflict between Max, Furiosa, and the brides of Immortan Joe, and the tribe of all women against Immortan Joe for control of the Citadel. Max and gang all get back to the Citadel after killing Immortan Joe. Max leaves. Max leaves probably to maintain the man with no name character archetype. Now let's talk about the movie's reception. Now, this movie has a Rotten Tomatoes score of 97% based on 419 critic reviews and an audience score of 85% based on 128,180 audience reviews. And this movie has a Metacritic score of 90% based on 51 critic reviews and a user score of 8.6 out of 10 based on 4,039 ratings. And this movie sits on IMDb at 8.1 out of 10, and that's based on 850,252 reviews. Now, this movie had an estimated budget of anywhere from $150 to $200 million. For this, we'll just use the conservative estimate of $150 million. And this movie grossed $375,209,362 worldwide. And if we look at the gross in terms of 2020 numbers, that is a gross of $408,105,105.94. Now, to put this into perspective, I have adjusted all the grosses for the prior movies for 2015 numbers to show how much Fury Road actually grossed. So the first movie, if we inflated the gross for 2015, grossed $326,469,696.97. The Road Warrior in 2015 numbers grossed $88,420,849.74. And Beyond Thunderdome grossed in 2015 numbers $79,806,485.29. So if we look at the inflated grosses of all these movies in the franchise for 2015 numbers, since that's the last entry we got for the Mad Max franchise, what we find is this is the highest grossing entry in the franchise. Yes, it even grossed more than the first movie, and the first movie set the world record for most profitable movie in relation to its budget. Now, why is it that we haven't gotten a sequel to Fury Road yet? I personally believe that it has to do with the budget. Yes, this movie is the highest grossing movie in the franchise, but it was also the most expensive one to make at anywhere from $150 to $200 million. The biggest budget before this was Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, and that had a budget of only $10 million, which if we adjust for inflation in 2015 numbers, that's a budget of $22,027,602.23. And if we look at the math, that is only about 15% of the budget allocated to Fury Road if we take the conservative estimate of $150 million for Fury Road's budget. Now, something that I forgot about until just a day before I recorded this is there was a lawsuit that George Miller filed in 2017 against Warner Brothers over an unpaid bonus for Mad Max Fury Road. So maybe that also plays into the fact why we have yet to see a sequel to this movie. And in my personal opinion, Mad Max after this movie has become nothing more than a brand name. Now, I've said this multiple times, but I'll say it again. Max could have been written out of the movie and nothing would have changed. This is the only movie in the Mad Max series that you can make that argument for. I could also make the argument that this movie would have made more money with Mel Gibson as Mad Max instead of Tom Hardy. Imagine the marketing and hype. Mel Gibson returning to the role that made him one of the biggest movie stars in the world. I think this movie grosses 2 to 3 times the amount it did with Mel Gibson as the lead character instead of Tom Hardy. Now, I'll end the episode off with this. If we look at the movie for its substance, this was heralded as a feminist movie. Now, I could personally see that. Furiosa was the main character. Max wasn't even present in the movie despite it being called Mad Max Fury Road. The Brides of Immortan Joe are nothing more than MacGuffins that are really just there to push an ideology. And for those that don't know what a MacGuffin is, it's defined as an object or device in a movie or a book that serves as a trigger for the plot. If the brides are just there for Immortan Joe to chase after Furiosa to claim them, then the brides are not characters. The filmmakers have basically made them objects for the plot to move along. Oh, but it's a feminist movie. Just don't mention that part and you'll be okay. And that's where you really piss off the fans for this movie. For fans of the movie who have nothing better to do than to pick fights with people who don't like Fury Road, tell me one of the names of the Brides of Immortan Joe without looking them up first on IMDb or Wikipedia. You probably can't do it because the brides are inconsequential to the movie. If we remove the feminism from the movie, what are we left with? It's really just one big car chase is all this movie is. In my opinion, this has become the most forgotten entry in the franchise because it's just one big car chase with feminism ideology from the 2010s just smashed in there. Now, I've said this once, and I'll say it again. Infusing modern identity politics into your movie will almost ensure that it will age poorly come 5 to 10 years after its release. That's because identity politics can change within a snap of the fingers. Now, if you're making your movie to please the identity politics crowd of any given year, you'll please them then, but you're still going to piss them off later. So I feel I need to ask the filmmakers this question. Was it worth putting modern identity politics, or in this case 2015 identity politics, into your movie if it meant sacrificing all of the goodwill that was built over the past 30 plus years of your long-running franchise?